That's a nice segue into Uzramma's presentation of the crafts.
Yeah, well, I will start by responding to Sudha's comment that barley is actually craft and not, doesn't fall actually under the on. Sorry, okay. So I would say that since barley is a ritual craft, that it should actually be considered an art form. Now, I'm going to really deal with the craft mode of production as a large part of Indian industrialization. And I believe that this is the only way that we will ultimately be able to have an equitable society. Chomsky quotes the words of Rudolf Rocker, who says, "The problem that is set for our time is that of freeing man from the curse of economic exploitation and political and social enslavement. And the method is not the conquest and exercise of state power, nor stultifying parliamentarism, but rather to construct the economic life of the peoples from the ground up and build it up in the spirit of socialism." Rocker goes on to say, "But only the producers themselves are fitted for this task, since they are the only value-creating element in society out of which a new future can arise." I fully subscribe to this vision. I believe that a true democracy must be based on democracy in production, where the actual hands-on producers are the owners of the means of production. I believe that the capital that is needed for production and distribution should also be held by the producers themselves. I believe that a large part of the production that is needed for a healthy society can be done through the craft mode. I believe that the distribution and market exchange of production should be directed by the producers themselves and by agents under their control and responsible to them. In my opinion, there is more potential for a democratic production system in the craft mode of production than if we pursue the capital-intensive economic systems that we seem to be bent on fully adopting today, in which the rich will continue to get richer and the poor poorer, as Thomas Piketty has clearly shown. Saying that we should encourage the craft mode of production is not to suggest a revivalist way of doing things. Our society needs to rid itself of historical injustices, but it cannot be done by imposing a new set of injustices, those of the capitalist system. We need to retain the positive advantages of our heritage while cleansing it of its feudal and anachronistic characteristics. The greatest advantage of the craft mode of production and its greatest potential for equitable industrialization is in its decentralization, in its low-cost infrastructure, its flexibility of production and use of renewable energy for production, and of course, our vast inherited skill base. The greatest disadvantage in the craft sector is the hierarchic production relations that were part of traditional craft production and that continue today. And in this, Rajni might disagree, but the role of the middleman has not been a positive one. When he is the provider of finance and of market access, he benefits from the labor of others. The right to profit, like the ownership of the means of production, is the right of the primary producer. And I believe that Indian society needs to actively pursue these rights. And as my friend also said, there is also a great problem in the role of media in directing public opinion towards the craft, and I'll speak about that in a bit more detail later. About the relationship to the market of craft production. In the past, small independent producers had close relations to the periodic markets, the local weekly hearts, as well as the annual fairs and jatras. The weekly hearts were the hub of the economy as an enabling and supportive mechanism for small-scale production and for the necessary services, rather than being a dominant and dictating market system that militates against the diversity of that production. We need to challenge today's role of the market, which has become dominant and dictative. And the market also today creates artificial wants and then tells the producers that those wants must be satisfied. I believe that the craft mode of production will restore the necessary linkages between agriculture and industry, which have been distorted by the intervention of large capital in between the various stages of production. For instance, I quote from my paper, skill-based craft industries scattered throughout the remotest villages often have close relations with nearby small factory production. For instance, artisan brass work throughout the country gets its raw material of brass sheet made in small local brass mills, while artisanal practices of lost wax casting use scrap metal from the same small factories. Small glass factories in Uzramma, Uttar Pradesh, used to supply the artisanal small bead industry of Papa Naidu Pet in Andhra Pradesh, miles away, but closely connected through their production. This kind of productive interdependence between craft production and small industry is impossible for craft clusters with large corporate industry located in industrial ghettos. Now that the small glass factories of Firozabad are being pushed out of the market by bigger fish, the Papa Naidu Peta bead makers are struggling. Some artisan production chains have been distorted by the interventions of high capital in some of the stages of production. In my own experience of the artisanal cotton textile industry, it is large spinning mills that have become the dictators to both cotton farmers and hand weavers. They are the only customers of the cotton that the farmer grows. So they dictate the variety of cotton that is to be grown. And they produce the yarn for hand weaving. They are the only people who produce yarn for hand weaving, whether it's mill weaving or hand weaving, which dilutes the greatest strength of hand weaving, which is to be able to produce a vast diversity of products and use a vast diversity of yarns, again made from a vast diversity of cotton plant varieties. Because my involvement has been in cotton textile production, in the indigenous cotton textile industry of India, this has been my field of historical study. And I have been involved in the present situation and have also attempted to convince people of its future potential. I can't say I've had much success up to now. So I've tried to say that the principles of craft industry are relative to the alternative Indian industrialization that we need to not just dream about, but to actively promote. And a whole part of this journey is to look at how technology development, in this case of cotton yarn spinning, dictates the cotton that has to be grown. I've spoken in detail to a few people, and I've made many other presentations about this, about how the technology of cotton yarn spinning was developed in the West, and it can only take long, staple cotton, which needs to be long and strong enough to withstand the heat and the stress of cotton yarn spinning. It doesn't actually produce the best kind of cloth. Now, it's very strange that a country that produced the best kind of cloth, whether it was very fine cloth or the large quantities of ordinary cloth that were exported, it's not that the technology of that culture, which has been converted into mechanized yarn spinning today, but from a totally different culture, which actually was a very exploitative way of the cotton textile industry based on slave-grown cotton and child labor. And the Malkha organization in which I am involved has taken the first steps in the long road towards equalizing this unequal relationship. I quote from a statement of its objectives written by my younger colleagues. The driving ideal behind Malkha is decentralization, where people constituting a society collectively own the means of production and govern their own fate. We need to see the craft industries as green technologies for the future in order to gain for them the facilities that any industry requires from the state, access to institutional research and finance, and protection of their brand. But the media doesn't help in this effort. If you type the word handloom in your browser, you will be directed to press headlines such as gloom and doom over loom. Now, this creates this kind of fatal sympathy for handloom. It's not the kind of sympathy you would feel for somebody with a broken leg, you can actually take to the hospital and do something about. It's a kind of sympathy for somebody who you know is dying and you can't do much for. Strangely enough, the paradox is that actually the mechanized textile industry is in deep trouble. It is the third worst of the loan defaulting industries of India. And it's like what could be called, what Pallav Das said, no one hears about the Sharavati breakdown. While the failures of clean energy systems are loudly broadcast, there's a fudged narrative. If you consider reduction of pollution, environmental issues, and on the other side, the cost of bank loans and unpaid debts, externalized losses of the industry that Rajni referred to, on each of these, craft industries score over mainstream industry. Now, in this field, unlike in some of the others that we talked about, we actually have a strategy to achieve the vision, and the path is quite clear. We have a vast skilled base located in the disadvantaged segments of our society. And though it is depleting, this reservoir of artisanal skills is still very much there. And the market is looking for the products of craft which are varied because they're fed up of the same products of the mass-produced industry. The question is, the state has a big role to play in this. As the state regulates management, labor and corporate industry, it has to take a hand in regulating the issues between management and labor in craft industry. But I don't think the prospect looks too good right now. Thank you.
Clarification about the middleman factor which I mentioned yesterday. I'm completely in agreement with Uzramma about the importance of spaces that open up when the consumer and the producer are able to deal directly. But that is not possible very often in a regional context. That may be possible in the same village and the next village. The context in which I was making that observation about middlemen was that, for example, now many big, newfangled, technology-driven deals are being put up where the farmer will be able to sell directly to some big distributor, okay, and get a much better price than they ever got before. But historically what we have seen, and I'm going by the experience of the US, is that once over a period of time enough middlemen have been eliminated, in other words enough players have been removed from the market, then that single or one or two big players become virtual monopolies, and that has a very destructive effect. It's very counter economic democracy. So I'm just clarifying. That Uber is very likely to go that way. And by the way, I want to say that my interview with the Uber driver that day was very instructive. He says, "Madam, ये तो मुझे भी समझ आ रहा है कि ये तो अभी नई बात है, तो हमें सुबह के रश आवर के लिए 100 रुपीस का इंसेंटिव देते हैं. जब एक बार इनको लाइसेंस मिल गया, तब हमारा क्या होगा हम अभी नहीं जानते." So लोग बहुत चौकन्ने हैं.
In fact, what Uzramma is dealing with, and we have been dealing with it for more than now 3 decades. So we also started at that time, but we realized that at that time, because we were debating with the small and beautiful, we understood ourselves as network forms of organization rather than merely small producer identity for the craft. Because crafts can exist in network form far better than if they are really shaped only as small producers, because then they have to compete also as individual producers, and there are all sorts of things. And I think we have gained a lot of experience. I'm willing to discuss with regard to also technological histories also, the way networks are in position to intervene and the way the individual producers intervene. There's a whole considerable experience in the history of technology in a variety of areas that finally you have to collectivize people in order to really even get the appropriate technological challenges to be dealt with as far as it's concerned. So I think way we present ourselves in the craft mode of production, because that's certainly associated producers, even some people have seen it as as it was, because the Soviet Union chose a particular form of state socialism, etc., whereas that was not the form which was actually the best form in which the innovation could have been continued or the control of the workers could have been continued. But it was an intermediate stage, a lot was learned, a lot was gained, but there are lessons. So I think when we are now today building on modern, even possibilities which have been thrown by both internet or by others, there is a whole reconceptualizing the craft mode of production itself is a challenge before us. This is how I see that, and I think this is across both modern and traditional technologies that this challenge exists. How do we conceive ourselves as a network where there is a far more autonomy, and the markets can be actually dealt with through the various methods of planning and other association social control. That is what you were referring to, and this is what in that particular format. But I think the way we present it, our identity is also very important, the way we present it.
The example of Charcraft, I want to just speak on that and ask you a question about that. So I think most people here would know Charcraft is a state government, Jharkhand state government initiative to promote about 20 different crafts in Jharkhand. And over 10 years or so, until very recently, it actually required a remarkable job of providing enhanced livelihoods or new livelihoods to about 300,000 families. And bringing back a lot of the traditional crafts. So I think quite an incredible example in some senses. But the director who took this through in the last 10 years just changed, and the new fellow is not interested at all, so things are beginning to collapse. So from this, my question is that state support, I understand, is crucial, but dependence on state support also creates a problem. In a situation where the state almost never is dependable in the long run. So, do we then need models of far more self-mobilization and self-organizing amongst the crafts, and then building the relations with consumers in some sense, and maybe investors, like the example of Just Change that I mentioned yesterday, which enables us to be at least to some extent independent, not only of the larger market but also of the state.
And what is the role of finance in this?
I said investors also.
Yeah. So who is required to play that?
I suppose what you call as craft mode of production, I think probably there are 3-4 elements which are intertangled, and I think they probably need to be separated. Basically saying that small scale type of production by individual producers or in cooperation is a viable entity even in the modern world, where so much of high technology and which are basically fueled by unsustainable inputs is still viable and is the way forward. I think that is one element, like Lambo's presentation sort of shared with us, the kind of thing that can be done are viable, and that is one type, etc., etc. The small scale nature of the production is something which has shown in the Indian context or the current context has positivities. But calling it the mode of production, whatever little I know about the whole mode of production, mode of production has a particular, as I could understand it, as whatever I have read, is basically a self-reproducing mode, number one. A relationship between relations of production and productive forces, a particular combination is called mode of production. Now this kind of small scale, and then you also probably assume this is a market related production. No market related petty commodity production can be a self-reproducing mode. It must necessarily have to, by its very own logic, lead to capitalist mode of production. There is no other way, unless there is some state authority or any other mechanism which stops that conversion from petty commodity to capitalist commodity production. So I suppose that is why I think I would agree with Dinesh that if it is a cooperative mode where then and a different kind of support socially, politically from the state, that is what you aim at, then please make it clear and let it be dealing from market as a mechanism, because market as a mechanism has all kinds of problems. In the smaller form, they don't look menacing, but all the menacing characteristics that we see today in predatory capitalism, all those menacing characteristics are there in its an embryonic form in petty commodity production. So I think we need to sort of make a difference between these 3-4 elements of small scale level of production where traditional skills are also being used. So I suppose how do we conceptualize it, I think this is problematic.
Okay, that's.
I have one sentence. Please explain what you mean by it is greener. I'm not understood. You said it is a greener technology. Explain what you mean by greener.
Our notions of capitalism and socialism. When you say richer become richer, poorer getting poorer, many people would contest it, including Piketty. Saying it's not actually the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The gap between the rich and the poor are actually growing. So you could argue that without in any way trying to diminish the significance of the condition of craftspersons, that you would have liked them to grow richer faster. And again, the issue of production and distribution. So I'm just seeking some clarification.
In Janta Party's first 77, khadi sheets, bed sheets were introduced for railways, and also Dandavate tried to introduce dresses of khadi for the railways, and they were opposed in a big way at that time, and it just couldn't be sustained by future modernist governments of Montek Singh, Ahluwalia, Manmohan Singh vision. So with the given context where there is acceptance of climate crisis, chaos, what he likes to call, which is closer to the actual, it's not climate change, it's climate chaos, and a desire, collective desire of low carbon budgeting. These crafts could be pushed again with these arguments having them on board.
क्राफ्ट की जब बात होती है और धागे की जब बात होती है तो केवल कपास हमारे ध्यान में होता है, गरम की जगह गरम हमारे ध्यान में होता है भेड़ बकरियों का, लेकिन बहुत से जंगल से निकलने वाली चीज़ों के बारे में कोई बता सकता है? कितनी तरह के रेशे और धागे कोई बता सकता है? देखिए बहुत सारे रेशे हैं, बहुत वंडरफुल, जिसे कहते हैं बहुत बहुत बढ़िया। कपास तो है अपनी जगह, कपास की मैं बुराई नहीं करूँगा, लेकिन बहुत सारी चीजें। अब बिच्छू घास है, पहाड़ में बिच्छू घास होता है, बिच्छू बूटी के नाम से सिंग सब्जी भी है और बहुत तरह का सब्जी, लेकिन उसका रेशा बहुत बढ़िया रेशा, और 3-4 तरह की बिच्छू घास होती है, बहुत बढ़िया रेशा उसका निकलता है। सदियों से उसका रेशा निकालते आए हैं,
कपड़ा बनाते।
अरे कपड़ा कहीं कपड़ा नहीं बनाते, लेकिन बहुत ज्यादा काम नहीं हुआ है इसमें। बिच्छू घास पर कपड़े रेशे का काम नहीं हुआ है। सेमल जो सब्जी भी बनता है, सेमल का आजकल जो लाल लाल फूल निकल रहे हैं, इसे सेमल है, दिल्ली में भी फूल रहा, हम उसका सब्जी भी कल खाएंगे, लेकिन उसका रेशा भी निकलता है। और जो आपका स्लीपिंग बैग है, स्लीपिंग बैग में उसका जब पक्का फल हो जाता है तो बहुत उड़ते हैं उसके बीज हवा में, वो रेशा सब हवा में चला जाता है, उस पर बहुत ज्यादा काम नहीं हुआ है। अब भांग है, भांग को लोग आप चरस नशे के रूप में देखते हैं, लेकिन उसका रेशा बहुत बढ़िया रेशा भांग से निकलता है, जिसका बढ़िया कपड़ा बना सकते हैं। बनारसी साड़ी बहुत प्रसिद्ध है, लेकिन उससे बनारसी साड़ी जैसा नहीं बना सकते हैं आप, बहुत अच्छा सिल्क उससे बनता है। अब ये क्या कहते संद है, एक पहाड़ में एक संत को तो सारा पश्चिम बंगाल और सब जगह होता है, लेकिन भीमल एक है पहाड़ में, भीमल।
जो भाई थोड़ा सा
चलिए मैं मोटा बता रहा हूँ कि बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जो जंगल से रेशे के रूप में लिए जा सकते हैं। बहुत सारा बैम्बो की प्रजाति, एक रिंगाल पहाड़ में बहुत बारीक बैम्बो होता है, तो इस तरह के भी बहुत सारे क्राफ्ट हैं, सारी चीजें हैं जिन पर काम करने की जरूरत है, जिन्हें खोजने की जरूरत है, जिन पर बहुत काम करने की जरूरत है। धन्यवाद।
As far as the example that Rajni gave of the farmers dealing with these big companies, it's a clear sign of the inequality And there's no way that can be all right. As far as the role of the middleman, whoever is the agent for the marketing in between the market and the producer should be responsible to the producers. And the profit should come back to the producers. It should not be somebody taking out the profit which is due. Dinesh, of course, networks of forms of organization where absolutely it has to be collectivized, cannot be individuals. And the Jharkhand thing, what Ashish was saying, of course we should not be dependent. The whole point is that we should be able to make, this is a dream, of course, to make that collective of the craft producers strong enough to not be dependent on either the market or the middleman. And what I meant by the greener mode of production is it uses much less energy. It's not dependent on generated electricity, and therefore it is greener. In our process, for example, in the Malka process, we've eliminated some of the very energy intensive processes. There's something which I have not been able to... Yeah, the relationship to the market. If it's going to go into market commodity production, obviously craft will become like everything else. But the whole point is the relationship between production and market. The market has got to be tamed. Now this again is a very long-term kind of thing, but its dominant role, reduces production to commodity production, and that is something we have to get away from. And craft is one way of possibly getting away from it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that there is any argument about. Climate chaos and low carbon budgeting, I'm totally in agreement with. और जैसा विजय से बता रहे थे, इसमें अलग-अलग तरह की चीजें बन सकती हैं, अलग-अलग तरह के रॉ मटेरियल्स इस्तेमाल हो सकते हैं, क्राफ्ट मोड में हो सकते हैं, फैक्ट्री प्रोडक्शन में मुश्किल है, नहीं हो पाता.
Wow, we're 1 minute before time. Thank you.